was maintaining, is what she was fighting to. Well, that's the other scripture. What? We don't fight against
flesh and blood.
Flesh and blood.
Against the rulers, authorities,
powers and principalities.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
that's exactly what she was feeling and what she was describing.
And with each spread, each page spread, I think what's also interesting about this book is that, as well as the quotes, which are supplied for reflection, you've created space, actually ruled lines here for people to write on, and use this either as a diary or as a place to provoke other kinds of thinking. Your goal is to get people to look at these quotes, and these are quotes from disparate times, places, people. They go together in unexpected ways to kind of provoke thought in individuals, to kind of get them to make new connections with these ideas and their own. What is the desired goal for you?
That's exactly the goal. I don't really think that people should feel as though that their thoughts are limited in a time and space, because most great thoughts aren't. And that's what really this book kind of highlights, is that, wow, look how long the great ideas can live in terms of time, how they transcend, that you can have scripture and wisdom that's written for thousands of years ago that is so much applicable to your life today.
Why do you think that is?
So in the same standpoint, you should consider your thoughts to be just as
part of
applicable in a time stream, that what's happening to you could be just as applicable to somebody 1,000 years from now, Harry. They can say, oh, Harry Allen called it again back in 2008. You understand what I'm saying?
But why do you think thought works that way? Why do you think this actually works? Why is it that there is this coherence?
Because it's cosmic. I know that may sound a little crazy, but you know what? I've always believed that ideas, really just like radio waves, are in the air. And if you put your antenna up, Harry, you could catch the same one that I got. That's why sometimes you don't really speak aloud the ideas or the plans that you may have, because do understand, great ideas are being transmitted, and what really, how you capture them is because you've got your awareness open. Your antenna is there. You are there to receive. When you talk to musicians, many of them will tell you, I don't really create a song, it comes to me.
Right.
I get in a place and I let it come to me. Well, you know, great ideas do that too.
Interesting.
So, I think we just have to.
You don't think it's that
open.
human beings are still in the same rut that they were 1,000 years ago?
No, I think thought is evolving. Yeah. Yeah. I think our spirituality is actually evolving.
To?
Higher and higher.
And how will it ultimately be expressed, would you say? As it evolves, like what?
Eventually, it will be expressed, I believe, as heaven on earth. So, but that's really a place within, to me. It is a state of consciousness. So it has to actually transpire in our evolution of thought. You say, oh, when's heaven going to get there? When you get there.
All right. It's like when people ask, like, what is hip hop gonna do next? I remember Mos Def talking about this on his album, and he says people talk about hip hop as though it's like some giant living up in the mountains. You know, hip hop is you, so it's like it's gonna do next what you do next. You know.
Thanks, Harry. And before you have a conversation of consequence with someone else, have one with yourself, and then speak, O you prophet. Thank you. Hi, and we're back. Harry, what is the second collection of quotes that you've chosen?
Well, from your book, I was looking through the pages and I came across a spread here. It's very interesting. The whole book is arrayed where you have a spread of pages and then quotes which kind of orbit each other in terms of meaning and concept. And there's one spread of pages here where you have the words of Mae Jemison, Gnarls Barkley, Rene Descartes, and Adam Clayton Powell Jr. And I thought that this, first of all, this array of thinkers was very interesting.
That's the party, isn't it?
But that's part of the way your book is arrayed. What's really interesting about your book is that you have all of these thoughts from people who, in many cases never knew each other, didn't even live in the same area of the world at the same time period. It's almost like what you've assembled is your kind of best dinner guests kind of group. Like, what would it be like if these people were all at the same table? What kind of things would they say or think about? So in this case, should I read this quote?
Certainly.
Okay, she says, "You can hear other people's wisdom, but you've got to reevaluate the world for yourself." That's Mae Jemison. Then Gnarls Barkley, "Does that make me crazy?" And that's the hook, of course, from their favorite, from their hit song, Crazy. Then Rene Descartes, "The greatest minds, as they are capable of the highest excellences, are open likewise to the greatest aberrations." Very interesting idea. And then last, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., the great 20th century politician and African-American leader, says this: "I am the product of the sustained indignation of a branded grandfather, the militant protest of my grandmother, the disciplined resentment of my father and mother, and the power of the mass action of the church." I guess the first thing that I think is that these are all just amazing ideas, but I'm curious how they all link in your mind. How do they all work together?
Well, okay, let me explain. This page actually on Adam Clayton Powell is separate, although it does lay across from the other three quotes. But I'll take his quote first. Adam Clayton Powell's quote really leapt out at me because I was thinking of the fact that in his day, he would have been called positively a race man. And a race man of that time symbolized the black man who was concerned for the race. I mean, who basically put above all else his devotion and his work for the race. A card-carrying race man who makes that a point. So it's almost like I'm from Morehouse. That was essentially the moniker that they carried. And I thought of that in light of Reverend Wright and the situation that went on with his whole publicity and his comments about his anger. And I thought, well, isn't that odd that at a time that was quite understood in Adam Clayton's Powell time to have that anger, to be identified as that race man, and it not really be something that would be negative or seen as negative. Because in light of his circumstances, it was admirable that he would put that as a foremost priority in his life.
Now, Jackie, not to cut you off, you say that in the book, this quote is actually not designed to go with these.
Exactly, it's not.
But as you're
but
speaking,
it does move to you.
It absolutely does, because as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking this. These three quotes talk about being, well, Gnarls Barkley asks, "Does that make me crazy?" And in the song, he's describing a whole bunch of situations, and then he asks the question,
does that make me crazy?
Make me crazy? Mae Jemison is talking about other people's wisdom, received wisdom, but then the need to think for oneself what one should be or do. And Rene Descartes says that even in the greatest minds, with the highest excellences, they're also open to the greatest aberrations. Those can be perversions, or they can be just things that do not fit.
So you do see the connection. It is connected, but it was separate in terms of when I chose it. However, there is most certainly an interplay here. Because if you were to be in Adam Clayton Powell's, in his point of view, that perspective may need to be reevaluated today. Well, as a matter of fact, we know it is. We've seen so many, well, the cum laude graduate of Morehouse this year was a white guy.
Yes.
So already in terms of his identification as a race man and his branded indignation, we see that the world has changed. Like, what would he now think of that? When we say the greatest minds, capable of the highest excellencies, also capable of the greatest aberrations, most certainly, because they have, let's say, tripped the light fandango in one direction, and more than likely, there's a possibility that there is this aberration on the other end. But then, as Gnarls Barkley says, does that make me crazy?
Well, I think what occurred to me as I was looking at this and looking at these quotes and thinking about how they relate to each other is that, well, first of all, if there was any person who was the receiver of, wisdom, but who had to evaluate the world for himself. It was certainly Adam Clayton Powell. I mean, this was a man who turned over the mid-20th century social order, and there were a lot of pressures for him to just stay in his place. He went to Washington. He could have just sat there and bided his time, but he chose to challenge the system in a profound way. Of course, any person who does that is going to be assumed to be crazy.
And
if
he
you're
was.
a black
He
person.
was thought of that way.
He was thought of that way by people in Washington, by even people in Harlem, where
That's
his
right.
seat was. And then finally, in a way, what undermined Clayton was that he had such a great grasp on power, but one, he was a womanizer, so that left him open.
Greatest
so
aberration.
you can see that as an aberration, certainly. And he began to, in a way, believe some of his own press in a way, and this had a very profound effect on him. Ultimately, I guess, just not being able to hold on to power the way he should have or deserved to do so. I think what, for me certainly, and those who get the book and who write their own thoughts are going to have their own thoughts, of course, and that's the idea of this book. But I think for me, looking at this, it seems to be that what balances what's accepted is what's insane. And what's insane is often what leads us to new balance.
Ooh, excellent. Ooh, Harry, that is excellent.
No,
that's excellent because, wow, I really enjoy this because it allows me to have this type of conversation with someone and to think that it's gone in another way and illuminated something that I hadn't really connected. I'm very grateful. So, yes, that is certainly the case. That is certainly
I mean, the question, does that make me crazy, is a question that, like, anyone who's going to innovate has to ask themselves. Does it make me crazy to lean this way, to consider this direction, to go this way, to come up with this new plan? Does that make me crazy? It's interesting, whenever you hear the stories of great inventions, for example, every inventor says every person told them no one would ever buy that thing. Even things that to us seem obvious now. They always say no one would want it, no one would buy it, no one would accept it, it was going to fail. For everything that ultimately turned the world over, nobody said, yes, that's exactly, even for things like television,
Right.
people said, we'll never replace radio. It didn't, it just eclipsed it. So, I mean, this idea that the balance between where we are headed or where we want to go versus the insanity of leading ourselves towards where we want to go versus the sanity of staying right where we are, I think is a powerful drive, certainly in innovative people and creative people.
Oh, wow. So we're going to leave it there. Harry, that was excellent insight. Thank you. Before you have a conversation with someone else, have one with yourself and write. Thank you.